Okay. So in this lecture, we are going to see structuralist approach to post-colonial state or relative autonomy theory of post-colonial state. Right? Structuralist approach or relative autonomy theory, as we have seen, as we have seen, is right. As we have seen, is Gramscian approach. What is structuralism or what is relative autonomy? That structures, superstructure, and basic structure are relatively autonomous from each other. Not, not one of them is really dominant. Right? As instrumentalist approach, what does instrumentalist approach say? That satellite state works for metropolitan bourgeoisie. Right? What is instrumentalist approach? What is instrumentalist approach? That satellite state work for work for metropolitan bourgeoisie. Satellite state work for metropolitan bourgeoisie. That means satellite state is instrument of metropolitan bourgeoisie. Right? Relatively autonomous theory or structuralist theory will take an exact opposite approach, whereby they will say that they will say that states in post-colonial societies is relatively autonomous is relatively autonomous from metropolitan and indigenous indigenous what is the spelling indigenous bourgeoisie. This is the central idea that states in post-colonial societies is relatively autonomous from metropolitan and indigenous societies. Right? Where do where do where do these approach finds its relevance? The relevance of relatively autonomous approach to Marxist theory of post-colonial state, which says that states in post-colonial societies is relatively autonomous from metropolitan and indigenous bourgeoisies. The relevance of it is found in Pakistan, right? There is this scholar, very big scholar, Hamza Alavi, Hamza Alvi, who wrote who wrote this essay this essay in the name of the state in post-colonial societies, Pakistan and Bangladesh. The state in post-colonial societies, Pakistan and Bangladesh. Right? He takes influence of Marx in 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. We have studied Bonaparte state. What is Bonaparte state? Bonaparte state is one such state which which handles social cohesion, maintains equilibrium, and and assumes the most important function, but still has but still is relatively autonomous. Right? We have studied this Bonaparte state with a state with strong executive, which performs function of social cohesion. Right? Hamza Alvi takes influence from Marx and Marx's book of 18 Brumaires of Louis Bonaparte, where Marx gave concept of Bonaparte state. What is Bonaparte state? It is a state with strong executive, right? It is a state with strong executive, and such state handles one function, which is cohesion between fragmented capitalist class, right? Capitalist class is not monolithic. Capitalist class is not one solid block, but capitalist class is fragmented. This fragmented capitalist class tries to influence state, but state also has its power, right? This concept that fragmented capitalist class tries to influence state, but state maintains its power and sometimes take decision even against capitalist class, is basically the idea which Alavi implemented in Pakistan, right? So what was Alavi's thesis? Yeah. So what was Alavi's thesis? He says that the state in Pakistan is overdeveloped. In Pakistan is overdeveloped. What does this mean? What does this word overdeveloped means? Right? Keep in mind Marxist theory of Bonaparte state, and keep in mind how always applying that concept of Bonaparte state in Pakistan, right? Then we'll go ahead. Always thesis say that the state in Pakistan is overdeveloped. What does what does overdeveloped mean? What does overdeveloped mean? Overdeveloped mean that overdeveloped mean that society is still feudal, right? Society or economy is still feudal. State has become modern state, right? So in modern state, right, state is overdeveloped relative to economy or society. This is the idea of overdeveloped state, right? I will explain this in more detail. For now, let's just understand that state has become modern, economy and society is still feudal. In relative to society and economy, state is overdeveloped, state is modern, state has modern institutions, right? State has modern institutions. We have actually understood evolution of state in Western world. We'll again understand evolution of state in Western world, right? To understand this concept of overdeveloped state, we have to understand evolution of state with respect to economy, right? In West, in West, when economy and state, when economy was a slave economy, how state was? state was city state. When economy was slave economy, state was city state, right? When economy became feudal, state became feudal. When economy became modern, state also became modern. That is, with modern capitalist economy came liberal democracy. This means that with respect to economy, state has been developing parallelly, right? Development between economy and state has not seen a lot of difference, right? On the other hand, we saw in West, now we'll see in post-colonial states how economy and state has developed, right? So I am putting it here, economy or society and state. State, we know how state has developed, tribal state, right? Tribal state, then Oriental empires, then tribal states, Oriental empires. Then what came? Then colonies, colonial rule, then post-colonial. Post-colonial rule is modern, right? In fact, colonial and post-colonial rules both are modern because modern institutions were present in colonial rule. In tribal state, society or economy was tribal. In Oriental empires, economy was feudal, right? If you have read history, you know that with Mughal Empire, you see system of bureaucracy in Mansabdari, right? There were Jahagirdars, there were Zamindars, which handled federal powers. Oriental empires had feudal economy or society. Colonial rule remained feudal. How? Because in colonial rule, if you remember, we have princely states. How many princely states were in India? Around 562. 560 plus princely states were in America, in India. Colonial rule had feudal society, feudal economy because princely states were there, zamindari was there, right? All these things were there. In post-colonial state, which is modern, which has modern institutions, which has parliament, which has legislation, execution, adjudication, all things which is modern, still society remains feudal. Norms remains feudal. Caste is there, religion is there, right? So with modern state, economy or society should have been modern, but that is not the case. Economy is still feudal. This is what overdevelopment means. With respect to economy or society, post-colonial state is overdeveloped. State is modern, economy is still feudal, meaning that society, economy, and state are at different different levels of development. State has overdeveloped, economy is still feudal, right? Then he went into the question of, then Hamza Alavi went into the question of why states are modern. Why states are modern, right? Why states are modern? Because of colonialism, right? Colonialism. Colonialism in India brought Institutions. Which institutions? Right? Viceroys, viceroys, council. There were two councils of viceroy. One legislative council, second executive council. Right? This legislative council turned to parliament, executive council turned to government, that cabinet government. Institution of viceroy turned to institution of president. Right? Then institutions like high court, supreme courts remained. High court, supreme courts are colonial developments. So colonialism brought institutions which were modern. But these modern institutions were these modern institutions were superimposed on these modern institutions were superimposed on traditional societies, right? So the evolution of society and political system and economy is not natural. It is artificial, it is imported, it is superimposed. I will explain one more time. Why states are modern? Because of colonialism. With colonialism, British Raj brought a lot of institutions. Viceroy, if you know, there were viceroys of British, governor generals of British. That position of viceroy or governor general of India turned to president. Viceroy, viceroy's executive council turned to government. Institutions like High Court, Supreme Court remained as is, but they were imported institutions. So the institutions which were modern were superimposed on traditional society. Hence, the evolution was not natural. Right? What happens in this situation? Right? What happens in this situation is this. Right? If you see Supreme Court of Pakistan, Supreme Court of Pakistan, you will see long life of long line of nepotism. If you see Supreme Court of Pakistan, you will see long line of nepotism. That grandfather was a judge, father was a judge, and son is also judge. Grandson is going to be a judge. Right? When you superimpose modern institutions on traditional society, things like this happen, right? So Supreme Court of Pakistan, Supreme Court is a modern institutions, but in functioning you see feudal elements of nepotism. Sala model, as FW Ricks call it. Institution is modern, but in practice you see feudal elements of nepotism to be present there, where grandfather to grandson, all of them are judges of Supreme Court. Right? But but what Alavi says that in such societies, states in such societies. By such societies, he mean Pakistan and Bangladesh. States in such societies like Pakistan and Bangladesh is not an instrument of indigenous or 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 metropolitan bourgeoisie. Metropolitan bourgeoisie mean bourgeoisie of other country. Indigenous are bourgeoisie of your own country. So, state in such societies are not an instrument of indigenous or metropolitan bourgeoisie, but it is not just an instrument, but it is the most powerful entity. State is not just an instrument, it is not an instrument, but it is most powerful entity. Right? How state is so powerful in post-colonial states? Because of colonial legacy. Colonial legacy has left strong bureaucracy, strong army, powers to state, right? Colonial legacy. That is why states in post-colonial societies is so powerful. Colonial legacy has left bureaucracy to be very strong. That is why state is powerful. The other factor is national movement, right? In Africa, there is this party, African National Party, African National Congress, not party, African National Congress. This party has been in power for 50 years or more than that. Whenever did Africa become independent? From that point of time, only party which has been in power is African National Congress, because African National Congress was very much involved in national movement. As African National Congress was very much involved in national movement, African National Congress got unimaginable legitimacy. They won every election because they had background of national movement. They were a party in national movement, and because of them, Africa got independence, and they started winning every election after that. And the third factor because of which state is powerful entity is because of developmental strategy. Developmental strategy. Why does army of Pakistan enjoys such goodwill in Pakistan? Because army army performs welfare in Pakistan, right? You will see, you go to Pakistan and you see army everywhere. They are building roads, they are producing food, they are producing even chips, they are producing even jholas, chappals, right? Sandals, everything they produce. So Africa in Pakistan, you see you see army to be everywhere. Development in Pakistan has been on the back of army. That is why army is very powerful there. So why post-colonial state is a powerful entity? Because colonial legacy of strong bureaucracy, then legitimacy due to national movement, and developmental strategy in which state is very much involved. This was this was Hamza Alvi's thesis on Pakistan as overdeveloped state. In case of India, similar thesis was given by Pranab Bordhan, right? He says that he says that apart from state, apart from state, There are three dominant classes: industrialist, rich farmers, and managers. In case of India, Pranav Bardhan has done relatively autonomous application of relatively autonomous theory in India. Right? Pranav Bardhan has done application of relatively autonomous theory in India. He says that state is one factor, industrialist is another factor, rich farmers is another factor, and managers are another factor. They influence each other, right? Out of these four, state is most powerful entity, right? And this is the idea. Understood? Okay. Now we are going to understand relevance of Alavi's thesis today. There is this book, New Perspective on Pakistan's Political Economy, right? New Perspective on mm, Pakistan's Political Economy, right? New perspectives on Pakistan's political economy, whereby few scholars have talked about it. Right? I will mention few scholars like Asim Akhtar. Asim Akhtar says that the legacy of Alvi is overdeveloped. Then there is Aisha Siddiqa, who gave concept of milbus, military bureaucracy and capitalism. Right? Military bureaucracy and capitalism. And she says that these are the actors today. There is Matthew McCarthy, who analyzes China's role in Pakistan. Matthew McCarthy, China in Pakistan. And there is S. Akbar Zahidi, who 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 says that Pak military no longer has monopoly on violence, right? Pak military no longer has monopoly on violence, monopoly on violence. Non-state actors are equally there. So this was Alavi's thesis, and this was relatively autonomous theory of state. I hope you understood this. I will see you in the next lecture. Thank you so much. Bye bye.